Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Realist and this is kind of a follow-up video to the Münster review where I elaborate on the proposal for an S-Bahn for the city and why I don't like it / think it's not sufficient. At the end I also add what I think should be changed. First of all, what is an S-Bahn? Well, S-Bahn is a name used in Germany, Austria and Switzerland for a usually electrified railway serving a city's metropolitan area. So basically a mix between a subway or U-Bahn and a regional train. It stops more often than a regional train and can use the same tracks, while a subway has different ones and stops more often than an S-Bahn. I know it's pretty confusing, but this is the general hierarchy of trains by their usual length of lines in Germany. The concept of the S-Bahn comes from the 1930s, with the first network being that of Berlin, and the logo, quite surprisingly, didn't really change since then, except for having the shape of a tombstone in its early years. Thanks, Adolf. However, I would like to reserve the history of the S-Bahn for another video. What's also worth mentioning though is that it's meant to coexist with other means of public transport, so here in Münster it should theoretically do everything the bus doesn't. Let's see how well that would work with the proposed network. The S-Bahn Münsterland, set to be finished by 2035, would consist of 9 lines, 8 of them already existing as regional trains, with the proposed S8 reviving the former line from Münster to Warstein. Though the track still exists until Beckum, the line would stop at Sendenhorst. Many of the lines now served on only one track would also be extended to 2 and electrified, since we still have a whole lot of diesel trains here. However, most of the mentioned lines experiencing electrification are said to be driven by alternative fuels, which is a fancy way of saying battery. Also worth noting is that it would connect to the S-Bahn Ruhrgebiet, which is officially known as the S-Bahn Rhein-Ruhr, through 2 lines. The S1 would connect to the S1, the S2 and the S5 from the S-Bahn Ruhrgebiet in Dortmund, and the S2 would connect to the S9 in Haltern, the S2 in Recklinghausen, and maybe, if the line extends that far, the S1, S3, S6 and all the lines mentioned before in Essen. Also, the S9 from Münster to Hamm might even go as far as Paderborn, which would connect it to the S5 of the S-Bahn Hannover or Hanover, which would be ridiculous. The frequency of the lines is planned to be at least 30 minutes, which it already is, but whatever. An exception to this rule is the line to Dortmund, which is planned to run hourly, not sure why, but I'd say, since the railway is only one track, that they just don't have enough 2-track stations. Anyways, the lines S3, S4, S7 and S9 are apparently not supposed to replace the regional trains, which then just stop less often. An interesting anomaly here is the RE13, which is a regional train traversing the Ruhrgebiet from Venlo in the Netherlands to Hamm until now. But it's planned to be extended via Münster and Enschede to Zwolle in the Netherlands, which would make it the single longest regional train in Germany, with 5 hours and 54 minutes of time driving, closely beating out the second place by 16 minutes. Anyways, when finished, the S-Bahn is generally supposed to run on existing train lines and especially stations, only adding 7 stations besides the new S8. You can see where this is going. The problem that directly catches the eye is that it basically only serves the suburbs and the eastern part of downtown. It basically has the same issues as North American transit systems, but on a much smaller scale. You can see that it almost doesn't serve the transition zone, which is a, as the name implies, zone of mixed-use development between downtown and suburbs. If I had to guess though, I would say that the causes for this problem are different from the ones in North America. What I'm referring to is that the S-Bahn almost exclusively accesses existing stations and train lines. If you compare the network on a real-world map to the network of other cities, you can see that they serve stations that are much closer to each other in downtown than here in Münster. What I'm saying is the S-Bahn is supposed to serve stations that wouldn't make sense for normal regional train lines. Instead, we have a line going to the goddamn Netherlands. Look, no one is commuting from Glanabruch to Amelsburen and the S-Bahn will not change that. It's way more realistic for people to want to go from Hiltrup to Neutor and back, which they couldn't do with an S-Bahn and which is unrealistic to do with a bike or even a bus. What I'm saying is, give this proposal the attention it deserves and add a few train stations, revive the line from Münster to Sendenhorst, increase the rate of trains on a few lines, and that's it. No need to make it such a big deal and then underwhelm the people by advertising it as an S-Bahn system. Expectations are high for such a green and progressive city, you can believe me that, especially because this is the first public transport revolution in Münster since the 1900s. However, the biggest problem I have with it is that it's, in my opinion, so easily fixable. Of course, the thing would get a whole lot more expensive, but take a look yourself. In case you stopped my last video at 6:43, you might have seen a Reddit user's proposal for an S-Bahn which I quite like. It is completely unrealistic, of course, but there are some good ideas to it. Mainly giving the city itself a better connection and caring less about the suburbs. Because as I said, some of the train lines we already have could use some upgrades, but don't need to be turned into an S-Bahn just by putting different trains on them and changing the timetable a bit. So what I do is find a middle ground. So right here is my proposal for an S-Bahn Münsterland. It keeps everything the original proposal includes, but doesn't have as extensive of a network as the one from Reddit, while still having good access to downtown and especially Münster's fastest growing suburb, Dievenbeck. What I've changed is that all lines access the main station, and thus every line can access one another and long distance traveling, while passengers changing between lines can use the stations Preußenstadion, Messe and Bohlweg. There are also some minor changes, like the station Servatiplatz, weird name I know, from Reddit, replaced with a station called Bohlweg, which would be placed right where the lines meet, because it's more in between the other stations. Also, the network would include some more stations in the Ruhrgebiet, so it has better connection with the S-Bahn Rhein-Ruhr. I also made this version, which includes a sort of circle line from Ruxel to Osnabrück, going around downtown using an existing railway momentarily used by cargo trains, allowing them to skip the main passenger station while also giving them access to the industrial area of Münster, which centers around the southeastern part of the city and the port. Adding to that, I have to admit my proposals are money-wise still rather unrealistic, taking into account that the floor here is actually pretty shit for digging tunnels, so a tram is probably the best option here. Or a combined tram-train network like in Heilbronn, where there are just trams with higher top speed that use both tram and conventional railways. Anyways, to prevent reality from hitting, we always have to ask one question, even if it hurts. No matter which decision you're facing, there is always another option, doing nothing. Let's face reality here. Münster only has just over 300,000 inhabitants, and as I said in my previous video, traffic here is actually not as bad as in other cities, even ones with better public transport. This is a counter-initiative trying to put an end to the plans of the new S9 from Münster to Sendenhorst. Most of their arguments are just subjective and even what I would call picky, but they're asking a question here that I wouldn't have asked myself if I haven't found their website. Is it really worth it? On their website they mention that their buses are just too acceptable for a train and its noise pollution. That is something I personally wouldn't have a problem with, but to be honest, I understand it if people do. And of course, as I said before, adding any new railways might not be worth the money or resources because Münster's traffic problems are just not on the same scale as that of other cities thanks to its small size and bicycle infrastructure. So, to conclude, Münster has good buses, the city's proposed S-Bahn system is a scam, and if they want a justification to call it a S-Bahn, they'd have to take it a bit more seriously. So, what would I do? Taking all factors into account, what I do is probably just increase the frequency of regional train lines, add a bit more stations, make some railways double-tracked and electrified, and that's it. No need to call it an S-Bahn. Though, don't get me wrong, the best fix for Münster's public transport system, for me at least, would be two coexisting tram and train networks. But please at least make your buses trolley buses, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would really wish for my city to get better public transport because the state we are in right now sucks. Anyways, don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked it, obviously, and goodbye.